and to be able to do that. So in celebration of our Professional Speakers Day, we want to just go, yay, and celebrate ourselves. But one of the stuff that the opposite end of celebration is often falling apart on stage. And we've all done it. We've all gone blank. We've all lost our words. We've all had technical issues where the clicker doesn't work. We've all had audiences where we go like, who on earth are these audiences? And we've had people who don't laugh at our jokes, and people who don't clap when they're supposed to clap, and people who don't even listen to the speeches. They put their heads in their phone or chat to the person next to you while you sit there. I think one of my worst ones is when three ladies in the front row started to breastfeed their children in the middle of my keynote. And it took quite a lot of brain power to get refocused and to find my words. So there is a huge amount of challenges. And we brought in an expert, a person who has lived through this today. So welcome, Bill. Thank you very much for taking time out and chatting to us. Can you maybe just share a little bit? We've heard a bit of your official introduction. Tell us a little bit about where you've come from and a little bit about your Toasties experience. 28 years as a Toastmaster. Wow, I'm impressed. Just fill in the colors for us.
Well, I grew up in New Jersey, about 20 miles outside of New York City, and started my professional career on the floor of the New York Futures Exchange, which is a derivatives exchange. It's on Wall Street. And I'm guessing about 2 months after I started, my boss said, we're going to close this down. It was a brand new exchange. And so I'm here, 21 years old, thinking I already have to find a new job. And I just couldn't imagine what that was going to be like, going around to people and saying, no, it's not my fault. I lost my job after 2 months. They just closed the place down. But instead, he asked me to move out to Chicago, which is the mecca, if you will, of the financial futures world. And I started a career there on the floor of the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, worked my way up through the ranks, was working for Goldman Sachs, heading what is known as stock index futures for them, and they asked me to move to London. I moved to London in 1993, and what was supposed to be a 2-year stay there turned into 17. Ended up retiring from banking in 2007. At that time, I was with Citigroup, and was the managing director and head of European futures there. And at that point, we stayed there for a few more years. My sons were both in what I would call high school. And we had a situation where at the end of that, my wife said to me, you owe me 17 years of sun. So we moved to Cape Town. And we were down here for 5 years, from 2010 to 2015. We moved back to Chicago for 8 years due to health issues, et cetera, with our moms. And now we've just recently moved back in June. In terms of Toastmasters, I joined Toastmasters in 1995. And unlike so many people that join Toastmasters because they're terrified of being on stage, I did it to have a stage and to hone skills. As my wife says, you don't get enough clapping at home. So I went and joined Toastmasters with the idea that I'd be able to learn from people that were excellent speakers. I joined one of the top clubs in London. And to put this in perspective, when I joined Toastmasters in London in 1995, there were only 5 Toastmasters clubs in the entirety of London. Now I believe there's 80 to 100. And of course, the organization continues to grow and grow. So I've always benefited from Toastmasters. I've made a lot of great friends through Toastmasters. I've been able to get business off of Toastmasters because of people that I meet. And for me, the richest thing about Toastmasters is watching other people who are terrified of speaking and watching all of a sudden those lights turn on when they realize, oh, this isn't as hard as I thought it was. And sometimes you watch people absolutely excel in it. And that is an amazing joy.
So it is a skill that can be learned and mastered. It's not one of those natural things.
I'm going to say yes to both, actually. I mean, there
Mhm.
are people that, so the Toastmasters has switched over to a new project scheme, which they call Pathways. But before that, it was the competent communicator. And I believe there are many people that go through Toastmasters who are competent speakers. They're not great speakers, but they're competent. And by that, I mean they are comfortable if they have to get up in front of 20 people or 50 people, or if they have to speak in a boardroom and or even in front of a couple of friends sitting around a table at a restaurant. And so they're competent. And then there's other people who all of a sudden you see that they found their voice and they've always had stories. They just didn't know how to tell them. They didn't know how to put them together. I've seen people that walk in and give what we call the icebreaker, your initial speech, and think, boy, how many years before this person is the president or governor or senator, because they already have it. And you see that, you know that. It's the same thing with professional speakers. I've been in, I've been a member of the UK Professional Speakers Association, and down here in South Africa, there are a number of professional speakers who I think are competent, and others who are gifted, and others who are inspirational. And quite frankly, a lot of people will make just so much in their life in terms of what they're able to get in terms of engagements. And other people, it's a matter of, how high is the sky?
Yeah. I think for me, I go back to my initial icebreaker. I was taking Rescue Remedy at 4 o'clock in the afternoon before my speech. Now, if you ask me an opportunity to speak, I'm running up to the stage, grabbing the microphone. So I truly value that education that I got. I come alive with a microphone in my hand. I love my stage time. So I've thoroughly enjoyed. So I kind of fit a little bit of both those worlds. But let's dive into audiences, because it's all very well being a good speaker, a good product up on the stage there. But if we have to serve our clients sit before us in stage, often in the dark, if it's an auditorium behind blinding, boiling lights. And we feel the sweat dribble down our backs, but we're here to please the audience. But how do we do that, and what happens when things go wrong? So let's unpack that a little bit. So, Bill, tell us how important it is maybe to do kind of research and to get to know your audience. Well, I say know your audience, but what are some of the things that you've learned over the years to understand and unpack and digest who you're speaking to?
If I'm speaking professionally, I want to know who's in the audience. And by that, I need to know the level of knowledge of the audience on a specific subject. So my career, I'm talking about derivatives. Okay. That is a really different conversation if I'm talking to somebody who has just come to the exchange for the first time. They're looking through a window at all these people in colorful jackets, yelling and screaming and waving their hands, and making that apparent to them, like why everything is happening. And although it looks like chaos, it's actually organized and how it all works. That's one way of speaking to that audience. But I'll also have people that I would speak to that are MBAs, right? So people who have great mathematical backgrounds, they understand business, they understand exchanges. I'm not giving them the same speech. But you can also find that there are times where even when you think the audience is going to be at a certain level, they are not. I'll give you an example. I was doing the Chicago Mercantile Exchange had asked me to, the Chicago Mercantile Exchange had asked me to do a presentation for them in Poland. The Polish stock exchange was opening up a futures segment, and they were looking for expertise and they wanted to talk. It just so happened my segment was on right after lunch. Normally a deadly spot. I hate it, but it actually worked out to be a fantastic opportunity because I sat at a table with the head of the exchange and probably the 7 most knowledgeable people in the room about my subject matter. And I realized they did not have a very advanced knowledge of the product. And so with that, I'm in a situation here where on the fly, I'm thinking, okay, I now have to change the stories and the examples that I'm going to use in this presentation. Oh, and here's the other thing about that day. I was told that it was going to be a non-simultaneous translation of my speech. So if you will, I say a sentence, Bruce, you say a sentence in Polish. I say a sentence, Bruce says, boom, boom, boom. And then they said to me, oh, we're in luck. It's going to be simultaneous. So I don't know if any of you have done the math on that, but that basically means now I need to speak twice as long as I was going to originally speak. So I'm thinking, okay, what stories am I going to add in? And that's the one thing that I believe, if you're really an expert on something and if you've spent time doing something, I had 20 years worth of stories to tell and examples to give. And with that, even though my 90 minutes, which would have been a 45-minute speech, now was an entire 90 minutes, I was able to fill that with no problem. Just to show a little, just to show how long ago that was, when I say we did that on slides, it was on a projector with slides. Okay. So yeah, to me, you want to know your audience as well as you possibly can. Who's going to be in there? How old are they? What kind of backgrounds do they have? Because that's going to really influence what stories you use, what examples you use, how technical you can be, what kind of jokes you can tell, what kind of stories that you want to use, what kind of language. I'm always, always, always extremely careful about language and not using any curse words or anything that's going to offend anybody. It was interesting. I was emceeing what's the word for it? A review for different speakers and different comedians in order to try to get jobs for South African companies. And this one comedian is doing a phenomenal job. He's got a great routine. He has the audience in the palm of his hand, and he throws out a couple of F-bombs right at the end. And I'm like, well, none of these people are going to hire you. No corporate is going to take the chance of you using that kind of language on their stage because they can't afford that. And so I think there are people that are not knowledgeable about what their audience is or what their audience could have been, and they aren't really cognizant of how important their language is. But at the same time, the stories you tell are also extremely important in reflecting your message to the proper audience.
Yeah, no, I think that's so important. We were just sharing yesterday when we were speaking prior to this, just some examples of some examples. So yeah, always know your audience, and it's one of the things. I think one other thing just to add to that, always get to know who else is speaking at the event as well. And that's as important as the audience. And also I see so many professional speakers that walk in 5 minutes before their speech, they do their speech and they walk out again. Those are the people that lose connection with the entire event. To get there at least a couple of hours before. I always get there at the break so you can have a cup of tea or the lunch with a person and with people, get to mingle with them and then play around and then get to hear, because you can always relate to, as Bill was just saying, we can do this and this and build into that, the aroma of the whole day to fill that in.
Totally.
Yeah.
Let me agree with you there for a second and also put in a couple of other things. If you're able to get to the room early and you're greeting people when they come in and you have time to make a personal connection with a number of people, particularly people if you know that they're important in the room, okay? Yeah, there may be 200 people there, but there's 10 managing directors, or there's 3 people that were responsible for booking you and paying you. Make sure you make that time. But the other thing you want to do is, to me, that's a great way of getting yourself out there and known to a segment of your audience beforehand. But I always get up on the stage early as well. I want to know if there's a creak in the stage so it doesn't throw me off later. I want to know where the lighting is. I want to check the microphone if I get that opportunity. I want as few variables in this speech situation as possible. So
Yeah.
the more I'm prepared for that beforehand, in A, knowing who my audience is, and then B, understanding the place, my space that I'm working on, the easier I think it is going to be for me to be connecting well on that stage. And you,
Yeah.
like you said, there's sometimes you get on stage and I can see the entire audience, and then it happens more actually in stand-up comedy where all of a sudden all I can see is the front row. And you want to know that beforehand too, because if you get up there and you didn't know that beforehand, that can really throw you off. So you
Mm.
want to know all of those things. And if there's a set camera in the back, how far can I move to the left or right before all of a sudden I'm off that camera lens? Those things are all really important, and it's going to help you a lot in terms of your audience.
Yeah, no, that's so important. I've got a rule of thumb. Whenever I arrive at a venue, there are two people I seek out before my host and everyone else. There is who's the audio guy and who's the guy taking the pictures.
Right.
And make friends with those two people. Then I find the MC, then I find the host. And those are it's just in that order. And it always goes down well because you get so caught up in conversations with the MC and host that you forget to the techie guy and you have no idea who's taking photographs. So you're going to like, okay, here's my email, give the email to the photographer, sort out everything and stuff. So there's a lot to learn. Let's speak about audience because that's kind of where we want to go here. What are some of your techniques to deal with various types of audience? And I think probably size and scope. If you can't see them, how do you engage with them? What happens when they run away? And then share a horror story when things went wrong and what you did to kind of pull it back.
I actually think the larger the audience, the easier it is. Maybe a lot of people don't agree with me there, but a smaller audience is more difficult. It's easier to make personal connection depending on the size of the room, but the larger it is, the more anonymous your audience becomes as well. And I'll tell you why that's important. If you're going to be funny, if you're going to be using humor, a lot of times you have to give the audience permission to laugh. And if it's a small room, especially depending on what type of joke you're telling or story you're telling, some people might be nervous to say something or to react. The larger the audience, that disappears because you feel an anonymity, if I'm saying that right, being within the room. And so it's an interesting concept. Most people think, oh my God, the larger the room, the harder it is. I've spoken before a couple of thousand people at a time. I don't find any problem with that. Obviously you're not making eye contact with every single person in a room of that size, but as long as you're scanning the room, and so I feel like as an audience member, oh, he's looking my way. He's he's involved with me as well. That works. The smaller the audience, the more I really have to look at, like right now, there's about 25 people on the screen. If we were in a room right now, I would make sure that each one of you could definitely say he made definite eye contact with me during this.
Mm.
And the beauty of the smaller room is obviously I can look around, and particularly if I know that you and Nicolette are the most important people in this room in terms of getting me booked again, or you're the ones that have a particular agenda that I'm supposed to fulfill. I can see your eyes and I can see your reaction and I can see how you're reacting to everything I say. And even though the other 18 people may be laughing and they're enjoying things, if you've got a frown on your face, I've got a problem and I need to make some changes. One of the things that I will say about any time I do a speech, I am not a memorized speech giver. That has never been who I am. I don't think it works. It's always feels really canned to me. I hate sitting through those kind of presentations, and it also gives me no ability to change. Okay. I know phenomenal speakers. I know people who are professional speech writers for politicians. And I remember being in speech contests with them early in my career, and their speech is wonderful, and the word choice is beautiful. And all of a sudden they meant to say the, and they said the instead, and the wings came off.
Yeah.
And you're like, wow, right? And I don't want to be in that position. And if you've put yourself in a position where everything has to be just so, that's when someone fails. And that's when, that's when it all of a sudden the wheels come off the bus. And I think you always have to be prepared. You were just talking about it earlier, where something's going to go wrong, where you're going to forget where you are, or the lights go off, or the mic doesn't work, whatever it is. All of us in this room, if you've been speaking for at least 10 years, you have at least 3 or 4 things that have gone wrong in a meeting. And it's just a matter of shrugging your shoulders and saying, okay, well, let's just get on with it. I mean, if I flub a word, I flub a word. If I miss a sentence, I miss a sentence. I'm not doing Shakespeare up here. No one's going to know that I left out a segment, a word, a comment, a joke that I wanted to tell. Only me. And if I'm going to allow myself to fail and burn at that, everyone's going to wonder why anyway, because they have no idea what they did.
Exactly. Yeah. And that kind of comes back to the expectation of ourselves. I'm with you on this stuff. I always tell people never learn your speech, but learn the plot points where you need to be at a certain time to get there, and make sure you hit those marks and make sure your finish is good, because if you run over, then people, and then they finish on a whimper. So start strong, finish strong, and hit your marks. Everything else is almost irrelevant as far as the audience is concerned, because as long as you're getting through that structure, they're going to get there. And if you miss point 3 or 5, you're the only one that knows it, and it's fine.
Who cares?
That's easier. Who cares? Yeah. Let's speak a little bit about hard audiences. Have you ever spoken to audiences that are really, really difficult, or kind of marginalized? I was speaking to yesterday when I spoke to a Jewish function, and I was standing in the room with a room full of Jewish businessmen, and I almost got through it unscathed. How do you sort of deal with hostile audiences, or audiences that are very hard to speak to?
Never had a hostile audience. I think unless you're a politician and a segment of the audience is there to boo you, to heckle you, whatever that is, because they're trying to disrupt you. I don't think most of us speak to hostile audiences unless you're talking about something extremely controversial. And don't get me wrong, very difficult. There are a lot of people now that will not walk onto a stage at an American university because there is so much a separation now in terms of viewpoints, that they won't go there because there is this hostile environment. In fact, a lot of comedians won't even go to universities anymore because they get just too much flack about it. But I think overall, most people, when they're in a speaking situation, I don't think you're going to find someone hostile. Someone may be in disagreement with you in terms of a story that you told, or an opinion that you gave. And I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with someone having a differing opinion. I'm going to find that more in a Toastmaster situation. If I speak professionally, historically, it was on financial things. You may think there's a different way of getting the same result, or a better way, but it's not going to be hostile. You may have a differing viewpoint. In terms of if I'm talking to people about how to give presentations or how to do sales, again, I'm not expecting to have a difficult audience with that. Now, I've had a difficult audience as a salesperson, and I've had a difficult audience in terms of somebody who's trying to pick up business, or, geez, I'm in derivatives. I've had to make a lot of phone calls and say, I'm sorry to tell you, you're down $500,000 in the last 4 minutes. That's a difficult conversation. And for me, I've made a lot of those. So flubbing something on a stage, it's immaterial in comparison.
No. So how would you handle somebody who puts their hand up and says, excuse me, Mr. Speaker, I think you're a complete idiot and I don't agree with you, and is just there to almost kind of heckle and object, and often try steal the room from the stage?
They're going to call me an idiot. They're probably a family member. So I'm going to deal with that probably afterwards. But I tell this to people all the time. When you take a speaking engagement, quite often there's a question and answer period afterwards, depending on what you're speaking on. And this is where I find so many professional speakers and non-professional speakers fail. in that they feel like they have to know everything. I'm the expert, and therefore I have to have an answer for everything. And someone asks you a question, and you don't know the answer. And quite often, I'm going to say 60, 70% of the time, when people ask a question from the audience, it's not that they don't know the answer. It's that they do, or they have a very strong opinion on it. I have zero problem with saying to you, that's an excellent question. It is not really my specific area of expertise. That falls under a different area within derivatives. But my colleague Brian Adams is in the audience, and I'll come up to you afterwards and introduce you, and he's going to be able to answer that for you. Next question, please.
Yeah.
I don't let them steal the show. I don't let them grab the microphone. I have them take the microphone away if that's the way that they're doing it. But the last thing I want is all of a sudden for you to take 10 minutes out of my my Q&A.
No, that's wise words. And I think as one gets experience and more confident, we're able to do that. I've actually given the hand to somebody to say, like, stop talking, and they did. I was lucky because it was getting a little bit heated. People were arguing in the audience when I wasn't finished yet. And I think it's just learning those certain phrases, like, do you actually have a question there, sir? Or, excuse me, ma'am, can we take this offline, or can we refer, and can I get back to you? And it's having those little taglines in your reserve, but then having the confidence and being bold enough to use them when things I've had quite a lot of heated engagement where I'm emceeing company meetings or, AGMs. Oh my goodness, AGMs seem to be the wonderful place for bar fights and individual agendas. But let's move on. But let's flip over to some funny side. I know you're a master of being funny. I love your sense of humor. You've got a very kind of intellectual humor, not necessarily understood by everybody. It's not the foul mouth humor that we get that seems to be so popular on Netflix and stuff. And I think there is a way to be funny and professional. Share some tips on how to find that good balance.
I 100% think that being funny, there's nothing unprofessional about being funny. In fact, quite often, if you're in a situation where you're in a give and take on a panel, etc., the only way to be funny is that you've been listening. And if you've been listening, then all of a sudden you're able to throw something in. In terms of being funny in a show, I got to be honest with you. If you're not a joke teller, please don't tell a joke. Okay. I am generally not a joke teller. I can tell a joke. I know my timing is good, but it's still not, I wouldn't call it a strength. I have friends that can tell jokes all day long and they're phenomenal at it. But if you're not good at it and you don't have the timing and you don't have the confidence in telling it, then don't tell it. But it's rare to find the person that doesn't have a funny story. And quite often the best stories to tell are the embarrassing ones that happened to you. And the beautiful thing about that is you are there as the professional, you are there as the expert, but at the same time in telling that story, you bring yourself down to earth. People like that. And at the same time, you're elevating yourself. And I tell people to tell those stories all the time. It may be embarrassing, something that happened to you that was embarrassing. It may have even happened that morning, but it goes a long way in terms of bringing the audience with you. And so don't be afraid to tell those stories. It doesn't put you in a bad light. It puts you in a good light. Obviously, it has to still be appropriate for the audience and the occasion. But again, that there's a certain amount of confidence in that. But I don't think it's a big play and a big risk to do that. You had mentioned something earlier, Bruce, about being there earlier and hearing other speakers. That's rich for me because I love playing off of other people. I'm best in a panel and picking up on something you said and just turning it around a little bit. And that's rich for me. So I can bring up what the CEO had said an hour earlier, right before the lunch break. I can bring up what the MC said or the person that was just on before me. And I love linking all of those things in too, because it shows that you've shown interest in their event, in their people, and what they're trying to achieve. But you can also get some good lines off of it. I remember I was doing a speech in Paris for General Electric, and this was a 2-day conference for them. I'm speaking on the second day. I want to say I'm the next to last speaker. I'm the keynote speaker for them, and I don't have my opening line. I don't have a story. I've been thinking about it. There's nothing really crushing it for me. And all of a sudden, I'm there early enough, and the guy on before me is the head of legal. And as soon as he started to talk, I was like, that's it. So they introduced me. Now realize they're introducing me. This is 2008, 2009. The world has gone to hell. We're in a great recession caused mostly by derivatives products. And here I am speaking on derivatives. Okay. And so I get up on stage and I said, and people, people clapped. And I got up on stage and I said, geez, I said, I wasn't sure how this was all going to go down. Are people going to clap? Are they going to really be angry at me because I represent an industry that has put the world in such a horrible position? But then, I saw you clap for the legal guy and I figured, I'm in. And the whole world, everybody just started laughing. Everyone hates lawyers. And so with that, I got the immediate laugh, immediately telling my audience, listen, we're going to have fun up here as well as learn some things. And it was one of the best speeches I ever had. So I didn't have that story. Now, I would have opened with something else and it would have been okay, but it really went down in a big way, got an enormous audience behind me right away, and got rid of anything that possibly could have been a stumbling block right from the beginning.
Yeah, I think that's good. I've got a wonderful story. I was speaking just before lunch at a big conference, executive mayors and academics, my two fodder audiences. I love that. There's so much you can do there. And I was being controversial because I was asked to come and speak and push that envelope, which I love doing. And the one executive mayor, kind of half of them were asleep, and one woke up and started looking and didn't like what I was saying. And she just started to bang on her chair, shouting, order, order, order. And I pulled the microphone off to the side, but not quite far enough so everyone could hear me. And I said, Madam Mayor, you can order lunch as soon as I'm finished, but please keep quiet now. And the whole audience just burst out laughing. And then they were so quiet because they realized what had happened. And it recaptured the entire room, which was really nice. And then everyone was able to listen rather than object. And it was one of my greatest stage times when I can diss an executive mayor in South Africa politics.
Absolutely perfect example, right, Bruce? Because what it also did is reestablish who owns the stage, and that was you. But you did it with humor. You put her in her place, if you will, but in a very gentle way, a very kind way, and reconnected with the audience and recommanded the stage.
Yeah. I think that's great. I'm aware of time. I'd love to sit and chat to you for hours. Let's just go right to the end of the speech. What happens when you're finished and things have gone well, things have gone wrong, things have landed, things haven't, you've left stuff out, you've got slide, you didn't get to your point, it was amazing. How do you evaluate yourself after a speech? Could be a Toastmaster. Lovely about Toastmaster, you get evaluated, but in the open world, in the real world, you don't. How do you self-evaluate yourself based on content, emotion, and kind of general feeling? What do you go through?
First off, I do think you have the opportunity to get evaluations from the audience, even if it's not a Toastmasters meeting. You can certainly go back to whoever the organizer was, whoever it is that, that hired you, and said, listen, did I hit the marks that you were looking for? I'm going to know that I hit my audience marks. Again, if I have enough light in the room where I can see faces, I can see you nodding, I can see you crying, I can see you laughing, I can see that there's the interaction is hitting. I understand by that audience response how well I'm doing. But at the same time, there's nothing stopping me from if it's being taped, I'd like to see that tape. I want to see how I looked, what went on, what stories did I tell, how did they hit. It's interesting. You talked about it earlier. Maybe you tell a joke and it doesn't hit well. I have studied comedy a lot, and I lived right behind Second City in Chicago. I don't know how many people here are familiar with Second City, but if you've ever seen a movie with someone like Tina Fey or John Candy or John Belushi or Bill Murray, the list goes on and on and on. These are all graduates of Second City. So I used to go there all the time. And then across the street, really, down the street, about four buildings worth, was Zanies, which was the #1 comedy store for stand-up comics in Chicago. I would go to a show Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night. Same lineup of 4 comics, all 4 nights. And all of a sudden on Saturday night, first person doesn't hit, second person doesn't hit, third person doesn't hit. Exactly the same. Now I'm there all 3 nights. They're exactly the same routines. The presentation is put exactly the same way all 3 days. And yet he's not hitting. And that's the audience. That's not him or her. The problem is if you don't have enough experience, then all of a sudden you watch them crash and burn to certain degrees. They would finish their routine because they've been paid to, but boy, that's really hard to be up there for 20 minutes where you're supposed to be funny all the whole entire time and nothing's hitting. But when you get to the keynote, when you get to the mainliner for a comedy show, same thing. He or she isn't hitting. But all of a sudden, they start changing their routine a little bit. They're not as stuck into what jokes they were going to tell. And they may all of a sudden turn and look at a person, and all of a sudden they see Andrew there. He's sitting with 3 other guys. And how come none of you guys are here with ladies on a Saturday night? And all of a sudden, a couple of people start laughing. And all of a sudden, he starts getting in and he looks at Marie and says, why are you laughing so hard? Who are you here with? And all of a sudden now, more people start laughing, and he involves the audience in different ways and makes it a more personal experience. And then he goes back into his routine, and all of a sudden the level is where he wants it to be. And so I think we have that same opportunity as speakers, where we can use particular stories and particular events that may change where our audience is and bring a greater understanding in. It's interesting. It's not always about knowledge. I remember, and I tell this story all the time, I'm going to tell it here because I think it's really an important one for speakers. We had a big sales presentation to make to a very large client of ours in London. And we went in, myself and another salesperson, and a person who quite literally was a rocket scientist. And he's one of the people that puts together these derivative packages. And we went in to explain why they should put a couple £100 million in this particular product. Okay. So it's a big deal for us. It's a big deal for him. And this person kept talking at a level that none of us in the room understood except for him. And so the other two, myself and my colleague, kept bringing it back down and giving explanations to bring it back in, because we're looking at the eyes of the client and they are glazed over. He is a deer in the headlights. And every time we bring it back down and he starts nodding and he's with us, our other guy comes back in and brings it back up to another level. We didn't get that appointment. Someone else got it. And we walked out of there and we said to him, we gave him our evaluation, if you will. How did you think that went? And he said to me, great. He knows how smart I am. Yeah, I am. And we said to him, or my colleague said to him, he'd have thought you were really smart if you could have explained it in a way that he understood.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's that old thing. I don't care how much you know until I know how much you care philosophy. And I think that is
exactly very well put. Very well put. And it was funny because this guy's boss was a phenomenal speaker, had that same knowledge, that same kind of background where, he could talk at any single level, but he was a fighter pilot in the Navy. And so he made the comparison. It all depends on how the seas are, how you're bringing that plane in to make that perfect landing. And so I think that's where the experience is to realize and recognize there are so many different ways of connecting with an audience, but you should know when you're not connecting. I
Yeah.
will know if I'm connecting based on the laughs, based on the nods, based on the smiles, how few people are looking at their phones, and how few people have fallen asleep. I have a friend who uses the joke. I always love listening to Bill Russell. Um, I'm either highly entertained or I wake up refreshed. Okay. And I think that's a great line, right? So we have to figure out how is it that we're reaching our particular audiences and what is it's going to bring us back. But you always have the ability to walk up to people afterwards. Well, not always, but quite often, and say, what did you think? You know, did it meet what you're looking for? What is the criteria? If you're taping it, you have the ability to go back and look at it and see what worked, what didn't work, what stories worked, what didn't work. You know, the comedian Jerry Seinfeld, I'm sure most of the people in this room are probably familiar with who I'm talking about. He's had a show on for years. Jerry Seinfeld, going back to that earlier example I made, he will record whether a joke works better with the word the or the. He
Wow.
honestly will do that. And he does that time and time and time again. For somebody that has to do a stuck in routine like that, if you're going to be on television, et cetera, that is certainly something that works. But for us as speakers, we're not caught in as much to that. And so we have a lot more flexibility in terms of what we present, how we present it, and how we're going to take a particular audience on a particular day. And that may be a very different speech than the one we rehearsed.
Perfect. Cool. Okay. I've got one question for you, which is actually important because it's the only question we got. I asked people to write up questions, and we've hit you with so many. Hopefully, everyone's got tons of notes and stuff there. But that's it. How do you get people to ask questions when no one is asking questions? Give us a 30-second answer to that one, Bill.
Yeah, I see that question right now. Swiss executives dealt with them, understand. And that was something as an American going to different countries, learning all those different aspects of and the cultural differences. We in America grow up believing and being told that everyone wants to be like us and that we're the best. And you realize afterwards, not everyone feels that way. Some audiences are more reticent. I can see where the Swiss are. The Dutch are not. The Dutch will be all over you and will ask 1,000 questions and will tell you everything that was wrong with your speech. So there, in terms of evaluation, you're never going to go wrong if you've got Dutch people in the audience. But I have found there are times, even with rooms of people that I know who are experts in the same field that I am in, they don't want to ask a question. And so perhaps in those situations, you ask the question. You know, are there people here that wonder about this particular area? Because I have found in past experiences or times giving this speech before, this was a problem area for people. Anyone have a problem with that? Put your hand up. And then, if you will, you're asking the question in behalf of them. Short of that, you know, there's nothing wrong with the day ending early or the coffee break starting 5 minutes earlier. I mean, there really is. There's no reason to stay up on stage if you have nothing else to say.
Exactly.
And if no one has any questions, maybe it's just that you've done that great a job today that every question has already been answered, in which case.
Exactly. And I think that's where we are now. I think we've shared a whole lot of wisdom. Bill, thank you very much for your time. I want to hand back to Njideka, who's just going to share a little bit about upcoming events into Voices into Africa with our Speaker Bootcamp and our Pan-Africa Speaker Summit.